In the past, I've done videos talking about the perfect ideal film franchise that I would like to see for characters like Batman and Superman, and at the end of my Superman video, I said that I might come back to do another similar video, but I could not think of what other character or superhero team that I would want to do a full video on. I like things about the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and the rebooted Amazing Spider-Man, and I also had plenty of things that I did not like. But there wasn't enough that I thought went wrong with any of those movies for me to compile an entire video on what the reboot should have been. And I've already made my stand on the X-Men movies very clear several times. I love those movies quite a bit and would never want to see them rebooted. Not to mention, I've already twice talked about different places that I would like to see the X-Men film franchise go, so X-Men was a no-go. Basically, I was stumped. Characters either have had decent to good track records in film, making this sort of exercise somewhat pointless, or I don't know nearly enough about the characters to warrant doing a video. In fact, that's still an issue. With Superman and Batman, I feel confident in saying that I'm much more familiar with the characters, as well as their histories in the comics and many of the stories that they are a part of. Even though I'm much more familiar with Batman, I still wouldn't say that I'm unfamiliar with Superman. But beyond those guys and the X-Men, I'm really more of a jack of all trades. I've read a few Spider-Man stories, a few Avengers stories, a few Thor stories, etc. Not enough from anything to say, this is what they should have done for a movie. So that's my full disclosure right up front. In any case, I wasn't actively thinking of what other superhero film franchise should I do a video on. I was almost ready to just let my ideal Superman film franchise video be the last one of its kind, but then I kept seeing people complain about the upcoming Fantastic Four movie. This was a rare instance where I believe everyone who is keeping up with this movie has awful things to say about it. We could all debate the merits of judging a movie when it's still 2 years from coming out. And while I am trying to keep positive and wait until we actually have something tangible to judge, so far almost everything that I've seen concerning this movie does not look like it's the way I think they should go. So then I thought maybe I could come up with 30 or 31 very basic, short, snappy ideas on how I would want to see the Fantastic Four handled in a movie. I could post one a day on Facebook for a month. Nothing fancy, just some very basic things that the new movie, just based on what we've seen, seems to be missing, and some other things that the two previous movies also seem to miss. But after coming up with about 12 of these ideas, and after taking each of them about 2 sentences each, and transforming them into bigger and bigger paragraphs, it finally dawned on me that I could just do another ideal movie franchise type video. But I want to reiterate, I am by no means an expert on the Fantastic Four. I've read more than, say, Spider-Man, but my knowledge of the Fantastic Four is maybe a tenth of my knowledge of Batman. You have been warned. Before I get into the plot of the kind of movie that I would like to see, I want to talk about some other things that I feel like other creators in comics and in movies that we've gotten get wrong quite often. First, let me talk a little bit about the tone of the movie that I would want to see. This movie would not be dark, grim or gritty, or self-important, or really too serious at all. Don't get the wrong idea, this is still a kissing cousin of the superhero genre, more on that in a minute, so there is going to be high stakes and some kind of dramatic tension. But that doesn't mean that the movie can't be fun. Much as I don't really care for the Marvel Studios movies that we've been inundated with these days, one thing they seem to get right is that they infuse a certain sense of humor into each movie. This movie would need to be like that, but even more so. Looking at the last 2 Fantastic Four movies that we got, I think they got this about halfway right. On the one hand, you had a lot of goofy scenes between Johnny and Ben, which is good. But on the other hand, the first movie, Ben is all depressed that he's a rock monster. The second movie, Silver Surfer is all depressed about, I don't even know what. Sure, these circumstances are tragic, but let's get past that and have more stuff where Ben is trying to prank the Yancey Street Gang for throwing a pie at him, and Johnny is turning the Baxter Building into a rave for hot girls to party at. Basically, these movies need to be fun, and a dude crying about being made out of rock when he has loyal family and friends and a loving girlfriend, maybe not the way to go for these movies. I mentioned earlier that this movie would be a relative of the superhero genre, but you'll notice I was careful not to say that it was part of the superhero genre. Even though it's easiest to categorize this kind of movie as a superhero movie, the Fantastic Four are not superheroes. This does not come from some weird embarrassment over the superhero genre like Peter Weller from Buckaroo Banzai or the creators of Smallville. The Fantastic Four may wear costumes and fight monsters and supervillains, but that isn't their mission. They do these things because it needs to be done. Honestly, if this was made by Fox, where only a handful of superheroes exist in their movies anyway, and they so far haven't really done a superhero shared universe like the Marvel Studios people, then this excuse would probably work a lot better. In the comics, when there's something like 5 or 6 Avengers teams located in New York City, the Fantastic Four probably could just retire and all the other superheroes would be able to shoulder the load pretty easily. So if the Fantastic Four aren't superheroes, then what are they? They're explorers. Basically, imagine the Fantastic Four as present-day versions of what the crew of the Enterprise is doing in Star Trek, to boldly go where no man has gone before. And since none of the Fantastic Four movies have really done anything wild and fantastical beyond the team getting their powers, this would be pretty easy to do. When the biggest accomplishment Reed has to his name in Rise of the Silver Surfer is building a hover car, you know something's wrong. This movie needs to have exploration of the negative zone, communication signals coming from the future, anti-gravity sound waves. The Fantastic Four, more than any other superhero franchise, needs to be firmly rooted in science fiction. The kind you would see from the 1950s that is fun and bombastic, but is tempered by real human elements that will allow the audience to relate to the movie. That's just about it on tone. Honestly, the 2 official Fantastic Four movies that we got were pretty close to what I would like to see, at least tonally speaking. They didn't get everything right, though. That's my somewhat smooth segue into talking about how I would want to see the characters handled in this ideal movie. First, Reed Richards. Reed Richards is not a member of the Big Bang Theory. Reed Richards is not the kind of dude who gets shoved into lockers and pushes the glasses up on his nose to really hit the audience in the face with, "Look, he's a dork!" Remember, in the very first Fantastic Four comic book, Reed Richards hijacked a spaceship that belonged to the U.S. government. This really does not sound like something that a scrawny wimp who needs Ben Grimm to protect him would do. Reed is smart, yes, but like most human beings, he is multifaceted, and he isn't just the team nerd. Reed is Doc Savage with more science. I've heard at least 2 comic book writers use this comparison before, and it really is the best way to look at the character. And if he is characterized this way in this movie, it sets him apart from all the other versions of Reed that essentially boil down to, "I'm weak and can't do anything except say techno-babble." Sue Storm. In one of the hardcover collections of his run on Fantastic Four, Mark Waid explained his take on Sue, and it could be that since his run is one of the only complete runs on a team that I've read, but I think this take is a great way to take Sue in the movies. Sue basically raised her brother and more or less sacrificed her childhood to do so, but every once in a while she would spend a night partying hard. She had this sort of double life that she always tried to keep separate, her air quotes fun life and her air quotes work life. But with the Fantastic Four, she can have her cake and eat it too. She is the team mom for this group, making sure the squabbles among the boys don't ever get too serious. She's basically the glue that sorta holds the team together. She gets her moments where she's being the protective mother figure, but she also gets to have her wild adventure because she's riding in a hovercar fighting mole men who live beneath New York City. This would be a really unique way to play Sue, which I think the movies were looking for, but they missed the mark a little bit. Ben and Johnny. I actually think these 2 were handled more or less perfectly in the Tim Story directed movies. The material that they were given was not always top-notch, but the acting was solid. As I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't want Ben to be quite as much of a sad sack as he was in the first movie, and since this would be an undetermined amount of time from the birth of the team, more on that later, that would not be hard to manage, since if Ben did mope around about his lot in life, he would have done that shortly after the team's origin and would have been over it by now. Johnny is a tricky character because I myself would like to see Johnny be slightly more mature than he is always handled. This is not a slight against the movie version because in the comics for 60 years now, he's been the team brat. For the movies, I'd want Johnny to still be more or less recognizable as Johnny, so you can't have him stray too far from being what he has been for so long. But I'd want to see him ease off being the troublemaker that he sometimes is written as. Impetuous, impulsive, yes. Impatient, young at heart, a nice way of saying immature, yes to all of the above. But sometimes Johnny is written as someone who goes out looking for mischief, and I'd want to dial back on that a little bit. There have been various stories set in the future where Johnny is a responsible leader of the Avengers or the Fantastic Four, or something along those lines. If you imagine that the ordinary hot-headed troublemaker Johnny is a 1, and the leader of the Avengers Johnny is a 10, then I'd want the Johnny of the ideal movie franchise to be a 3. Still very much the Johnny we know and love, but showing signs of being the more level-headed guy that he could become one day. Now that I've covered all of the main characters that you would expect to see in this movie, are there any others that I should mention? I don't expect that we'll ever see Wyatt Wingfoot in a Fantastic Four movie, or even in a comic book again for that matter. I'm really neutral on Alicia Masters, if I'm being honest. She can be Ben's girlfriend or Johnny's, it doesn't matter to me. Oh, what about Franklin Richards? Much as I'd want to see Franklin be used in a movie, I don't think that he would work for a couple of reasons. One, kids tend to age at a noticeable rate. That's why Walt from Lost was written out of the show, bearing a few cameos here and there. It'd just be problematic to say that this kid who looks 10 years old in the first movie and 12 years old in the next movie is actually only half a year older. And I'd rather these movies not move in real time, as I think that often can cause more problems than it solves. There's that, and I feel if you include a kid in the movie, then Sue's role is relegated to being stay-at-home mom, or best case scenario, air quotes, protector of the kid. Nothing wrong with being a mom, obviously, but there is the unfortunate implication that Sue shouldn't be a superhero and is only around because of her nice childbirthing hips. So we don't use Franklin, at least not yet, and then we can use Sue as an active part of the team. Admittedly, the Tim Story movies did try to give Sue a reason to be in the team and give her stuff to do. I didn't entirely like all of what she had to do, but the effort was made. I think that's just about all of the main character stuff that I have to say before moving on to the plot of the movie. Truthfully, this is unlike either of my other ideal superhero movie franchise videos, because in both of them I planned out what I would like to see for 3 or more movies. But like I said, I'm not very well versed in the Fantastic Four, so I don't know the characters and villains well enough to say with confidence I'd like to see Annihilus for an entire movie, because I don't know that much about Annihilus. I don't know if I'd like that in the same way that I'd like an X-Men movie set entirely in space. So keeping that in mind, I won't be planning out an entire Fantastic Four trilogy, at least not in as much detail as you got with my Batman and Superman videos. But because this is supposed to be a lot like those two videos, I don't want to just cheap out on you guys and not plot out anything, so I will be telling you guys the things that I do think should be done, even if it won't amount to as much detailed descriptions as I laid out in my Batman and Superman videos. First, as I mentioned earlier, this movie would begin with the team already established and active doing their thing. Even with all the problems that I had with the previous two Fantastic Four movies, one thing they have done is provide us an origin for the team. Even if this is a reboot, we don't need to be told again how they got their powers. Just do a quick summary of their origin in the intro of the movie, like the Incredible Hulk movie did. Not only do I not need an entire movie to explain their origin, but also I feel like the Fantastic Four is a team where trying to do an updated version of their origin actually causes more problems than it solves. In the early 1960s, it made sense that the team was trying to beat the Soviet Union to the moon, and that's why they take so many risks in their space mission. These days, you have to come up with an actual reason to put them in space, which the 2005 movie did do, but in removing the space race element from the 1960s, you have to wonder why it was so urgent that these people go into space yesterday and ignore so many space-type protocols. Also, in the 1960s, for good or ill, nobody really questioned why a scientist and a pilot would bring a 16-year-old kid and his sister with him on a mission. They were there because otherwise they wouldn't have powers, and that was the end of that. But nowadays, you have to have a reason for them to be on the ship, and so the 2005 movie got around this by having Johnny be a NASA dropout, still doesn't really explain why he's on the ship, but whatever, and Sue is an assistant to Dr. Doom. More on him in a second. Needless to say, if you just skip all of the origin elements and get straight into them already having their powers for a few months, then you don't have to answer these questions that seem so very important when you're doing an origin movie. Speaking of Dr. Victor Von Doom, he is not a bad guy in this movie. Instead, he is the human ally to the Fantastic Four. He's often bouncing science ideas off of Reed, as well as helping the team to deal with stuff like meetings with the mayor of the city, paying for bills of the Baxter Building. After all, it takes a lot of electricity to maintain Reed's experiments. He also is probably helping Reed to market the less dangerous but still profitable inventions to help pay for the aforementioned bills. In the original graphic novel Fantastic Four Season 1, Reed had a female lab assistant who was sort of this for the team, but I honestly don't even remember her name. If you could have Doom do what that girl did, it would give him something to do in this movie, while also adding the element of prequeldom where we know that something is going to happen while the characters do not. In this case, we know that Doom is going to be the greatest villain the Fantastic Four ever faces one day. One day. While Doom is the most recognizable villain the team has, he is not their only villain. But since he is the best villain, he should be saved and built up so that when he finally does turn bad, it's a big deal. This is also because we've used Doom in both of the official Fantastic Four movies, as well as the unofficial never meant to be released one. Let's show off some of the other cool characters and give them some love too. Doom would need to be played as a sort of rags to riches guy who had nothing and was still able to be the second smartest guy in his college and probably on the entire planet. He's just a tiny bit bitter about that, but like I said, he's not bad, yet. Also, unlike the Doom of the Tim Story movies, this guy is actually from Latveria, so imagine someone with a Romanian-type accent as Doom. And yes, I know there was exactly one line of dialogue mentioning Latveria in the first movie, but really, if you took that line out, it's very clear that McMohan was playing American. As I've said before, superhero movies do not have to adhere strictly to the comics, but in the case of Doom as portrayed by Julian McMohan, what we got was basically Lex Luthor of the Marvel Universe, but if Lex was somehow less menacing and awesome. The idea that Doom grew up in a gypsy caravan as a child and ran away or got an academic scholarship to America, that adds something to Doom that you don't usually get with many villains. You wouldn't want to play Doom as sympathetic though, at least once he becomes a villain. Again, going back to the Mark Waid interpretation of the character, Waid made a great case that Doom is the kind of guy who thinks that he is honorable, and he may even make a deal with you and honor his end of it, but he only does this to serve his own needs. If you compare Doom to Magneto, Magneto is actually fighting for what he believes is right. In theory, Magneto would be okay with all mutants finally having what he sees as their birthright and him not being in charge of the world. But Doom, he cannot envision a world where he is not in charge. Doom might claim that he is honorable, but he's really just selfish and wants power, and more importantly, he wants to triumph over Reed. But as I said, in this movie, he's not quite there, yet. So if Doom is not the villain of the first movie, then who is? I would want this to be a collection of minor sorcerer-type characters. Nicholas Scratch, Diablo, some of the other Salem 7 characters. Basically, these guys are all involved in trying to raise some evil eldritch demon that they will try to control that will give them very easy access to taking over the world and the worlds beyond this world. Things get out of hand, and soon the sorcerer characters are eaten or enslaved by some Cthulhu-esque monstrosity that will escape into the wild, and the Fantastic Four will have to fight it. You know that the team would eventually defeat the creature somehow. Reed would probably set up a huge 5-second window into the negative zone and banish the creature there. Maybe that would set up Annihilus if you really did want to use him for a later movie. He finds out about Earth because of this giant window that briefly opened up from our side. But you might be wondering, out of all of the Fantastic Four villains that I could have picked, why would I go for some of the lamest? Well, this will sound terrible, but I felt that if you were going to start a new franchise, you would need some setup. Not necessarily in the way of plot, because like I said, we already got an origin 10 years ago, and we don't really need another one. But in the way of characters. We really do need an entire movie to kind of establish who these people are and how they relate to each other. And I don't think I'm shocking anyone when I say that usually when a superhero movie comes around, the first thing that people will ask is, who is the villain? Sometimes people even focus more on the villain than the hero, which is why I wanted this movie to use some of the least important villains possible. They'd still be a legitimate threat that require our heroes to determine that it is clobbering time, but for the most part, this movie would need to focus more heavily on the team dynamics if at all possible. And also, regarding how this movie is largely a setup movie, if you are upset that I did not use Victor Von Doom in the way that you would like, you may or may not be interested to know that this movie would end with the science-minded Doom somehow picking up a book of spells that Diablo or Nicholas Scratch owned, hinting that he might be interested in learning more about the occult in the future. Also, another pro to using magical-based villains in the first movie would tie in with the potential character arc for Reed Richards. I would want to parallel Reed's staunch science-based thinking with all of the weird magical stuff going on in the movie that you would get to see. I don't mind using science-based villains, and if you ever did a sequel, that's definitely where you would want to go. But one problem with that is that Reed is a genius, and if it takes him an entire movie to come up with a solution to the problem in the movie, then he looks less and less like a genius. That's why having the villains of the first movie be sorcerers is so brilliant. Reed does not believe in magic, but it surely does exist in this world. So his arc for this movie is to come to grips with this thing that he does not believe in, and somehow use this unquantifiable thing that he does not believe in to help save the world. And no, saying that this is brilliant really isn't me tooting my own horn. I got this idea from one of Mark Waid's earliest stories on the Fantastic Four. Don't act so surprised. Waid's run has been the biggest well that I've been drawing from for this made-up franchise, so I figured I'd do it one more time. What Waid did in the comics worked very well, and I'd basically want it to be done exactly like that in the first movie, just without the Doctor Strange guest appearance, and you've got a great thematic center of the movie. And that would basically be the first movie. Like I said, since I'm not as familiar with the Fantastic Four as I am with Batman or Superman, I don't have nearly as many raw ideas for how I would want to see the second, third, and fourth, etc. Fantastic Four movies be handled. Of course, one of the sequels would deal with Von Doom's rise to villainy, and possibly reclaiming the throne of Latveria. That'd be a cool movie to see, the team trying to stop stop a tyrant from rising to power, and maybe the American government saying, hey, no, don't do that. If he takes over, it kind of works out great for us. Which, hey, that was also sort of done in an issue of the Mark Waid run of Fantastic Four, where the team tried to rescue Latveria after Doom was banished to Hell. Not exactly the same situation, but close. And then, since we never did get an actual Galactus movie, it'd be really cool to see that done. Maybe do it 50-50 from the Ultimate Universe and the 616 universe. Use the actual Galactus from the 616 world, but let the atmosphere and the stakes be similar to how end of the worldy it felt in the Ultimate Galactus story. Those are some extremely bare bones ideas I think could work for future Fantastic Four movies if this movie was going to be made. But for now, this is where I am stopping. I do hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Also, if you have your own ideas for what you would want to see in your own ideal Fantastic Four movie franchise, tell me about it in the comments below, or make your own video and tell me about that. Also, if there are any other superhero movies that you think I should do my own take on in an ideal superhero movie franchise type video, then tell me which characters you would like to see me talk about. I can't make any promises since an A-list team like the Fantastic Four was trouble enough for me as is, but I will do my best. And if you want to see other types of videos from me in the future, I do videos almost daily, so come back tomorrow to see some other kind of video. Until then, have a great rest of the day.